Shadow of the Erdtree just keeps getting bigger. The Elden Ring DLC's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, apparently did not stop with the initial 3 interviews that we all saw a little while ago when the trailer dropped. There is yet another interview he appeared in with a Chinese outlet named Zihu that was just posted publicly this past Friday. And of course, along with the new interview came new questions and therefore new answers. So let's break down everything that was covered in this article, and remember, if you like news and lore breakdowns as well as lore deep dives and theories scripted in a way that every Joe Schmo and Josephine Schmosephine can understand, please feel free to check out my Elden Ring lore videos, some of which you might have already seen. Anyway, the interview starts off with a couple familiar questions before getting to the new reveals, but I'll go over them all briefly just in case you may have missed the earlier interviews. Also, please keep in mind that this interview was in fact uploaded in Chinese, and I'm at the mercy of using Google Translate to read and review it. So if anyone watching this is a Chinese speaker and notices a discrepancy or mistake somewhere, please feel free to post a correction in the comments below. I'm sure your fellow Elden Ring fans, myself included, would love to read the corrections. When asked why Shadow of the Erdtree's story was packaged into one singular massive DLC expansion, Miyazaki responded by saying it was due to really just covering parts of the mythology of the main game that they weren't able to in the base game, written by George R.R. Martin, due to it just being too large. And because Shadow of the Erdtree is going to be one singular massive addition to the base game, that also enables us the players to be able to feel that huge sense of exploration once again, instead of experiencing little bitty DLC additions here and there, which already seems to very strongly hint at the sheer scale and size of the new content coming in the DLC. Miyazaki was then asked again how the difficulty of the new enemies in the DLC will be handled, since players are undoubtedly very strong and set in their ways now that we're 2 years into the game's release. To which he responded by saying the difficulty levels are scaled to feel similarly to the second half of the base game. Again, in case you missed the previous interviews, there will also be a brand new level scaling system unique to the Land of Shadow in the DLC that apparently mimics Sekiro's level up system. In that game, you would defeat a boss and then gain attack power from that boss's defeat instead of leveling up by way of souls or runes like in Dark Souls or Elden Ring. This system is apparently coming to the Land of Shadow and will serve to essentially even out the playing field for everyone, no matter what your playstyle or level was. He was also again asked about new additions to weapons and magic, to which he responded that one of the DLC's main additions will not just be new weapons, but will be 8 brand new weapon categories that will undoubtedly feature dozens of new weapons individually, and therefore new tactics, and for lore fans like me, juicy new flavor texts to comb through for every single detail. These new weapons and spells will of course be able to be brought back into the Lands Between for use in the base game as well. Then he was asked a question that I'm not entirely sure Google is translating correctly, which is, does the DLC have 2 goals? I also tried to translate this question in Deep L, which made even less sense. Does the DLC have a 2-week design? So using the powers of an educated guess, I'm going to assume this question is about New Game Plus, since Miyazaki's answer seems to imply that that's what he's talking about. He says that similarly to the main game, entering the DLC during the quote-unquote second round of the main body is therefore equivalent to the second round difficulty of the DLC, which to me makes sense if you assume he's talking about New Game Plus, also applying to Shadow of the Erdtree. Moving on though, the next and to me possibly most exciting question he was asked is, how long is the game duration of the DLC? And does he recommend that players prioritize the main story or the DLC first? Miyazaki's answer here is very interesting. He says that he feels his answer to this question is not appropriate, because he was asked this very same question before the release of the main game, to which he replied apparently that Elden Ring should take about 30 hours to complete. And after the base game was released, everyone told him that he was either lying or crazy. According to HowLongToBeat.com, and I'm sure our own experiences with the game, Elden Ring actually takes an average of 60 hours just to finish the main story, and over double that, at about 133 hours to 100% the game just a single time through, not even accounting for any New Game Plus runs. Miyazaki claims that his answer is due to his own experience with the game as its developer. You see, since the developers are the ones who create the game, they're just too skilled to relate to us normies. So basically they can finish the game in half the time that it takes us. And okay, I guess that makes sense. Either way though, this means that his estimation of the physical size of the DLC and how long it'll take players to complete simply can't be trusted. And remember, with the way that Elden Ring's map was specifically tailored to be completely hidden from players until we all eventually little by little uncovered the entire map, resulting in one really cool wow moment after another, we do have reason to believe that Miyazaki could possibly have been intentionally misleading us back when the game was first released with that 30-hour completion answer, which clearly was kind of ridiculous, which means that it's very possible he's trying to mislead us now with the DLC. But I digress. Either way, the DLC is clearly going to be a massive new package of content to play through. He then answers the second part of the question by saying that similarly to the base game, there is a very loose order in which to do things in order to finish the game. And with the DLC, the only requirement for entry into the Land of Shadow is to beat Mohg. With that in mind, it's entirely up to the player if they want to complete the main story first before the DLC or experience both at the same time. The next question is even more interesting, especially for longtime fans of the Soulsborne franchise. He was asked directly if the DLC will resolve any plot points from the base game and whether it will bring up new discussion-worthy plot points. To which he replied that yes, some of the mysteries left by the main game will in fact be answered, and we'll actually get a little bit more on which possible mysteries these might be in a later question coming up. He then answered very vaguely that after playing through the DLC, there's no guarantee that we will have a deeper understanding of the world of Elden Ring, however, so I wouldn't be expecting much in terms of too many answered questions. He then goes over the fact that the events of the DLC will not touch the main game at all, and next is asked what the meaning of those shadow curtains behind the broken shadow tree is, as well as why they disappeared at the end of the trailer once Miquella raised his hand towards it. Miyazaki states that the curtains are there to symbolize whatever new mechanic is separating the Land of Shadow from the lands between, and that it would be too much of a spoiler to reveal why they disappear at this moment. He then states that this shadow tree was designed to be broken and decaying like this to imply that the world of the Land of Shadow is also broken and decaying and distorted and gradually collapses, which is extremely interesting. The next question is about the powers that be in the base game, also known to us as Outer Gods, and their followers such as the Two Fingers and the Stars, and whether they will reappear and have any influence in the Shadowlands. Miyazaki responded by saying it depends on how you define power or influence. He also said that there will be new groups and therefore some of the already existing organizations will be further expounded upon, which to me implies that we will know more about the forces of the Greater Will and the Outer Gods. Next is another very interesting question about the NPCs of the base game and DLC and whether or not there will be any overlap, to which Miyazaki responded by saying there will generally be no overlap between new NPCs and those that are already existing, since there are lots of NPCs in the base game that the player can, kill, which would kind of mess with the story of the DLC if it hinged on those NPCs. However, Miquella, which we never actually got to know directly in the base game as an NPC, will definitely be a huge part of the Shadow of the Erdtree. And speaking of Miquella, the next question is probably the most interesting and exciting in the entire interview, and actually makes me respect the interviewer as clearly they are a fellow lore delver. They asked Miyazaki directly about Miquella's lily as opposed to Trina's lily, and why they look so similar, and therefore what Saint Trina's role will be in the DLC since clearly she is connected to Miquella. He responded by saying that for the time being, you can regard the relationship between the two as being different existences, the specifics of which they do not yet want to reveal, but that we will in fact be getting a direct explanation for regarding their relationship in Shadow of the Erdtree. That's pretty intriguing. After this, Miyazaki was asked if there will be any other DLC for Elden Ring following Shadow of the Erdtree, to which he responded with a very solid and resounding no. Shadow of the Erdtree is the first and last DLC for Elden Ring. However, he is very particular about leaving the door open for possible other expansions to the overall world and story of Elden Ring as an IP, which is FromSoft's most successful single game to date, which prompted the next follow-up question of, if there is to be a sequel to Elden Ring, what story would that game therefore tell? Miyazaki responded by saying that he can't say too much about that because of his position as the producer and director of the series, claiming that whatever he says would be a spoiler inevitably since he tends to create and think at the same time when developing his games. As there are way too many variables to that possibility at the moment, he declined to comment at all. Next, he was asked a fun question about the other Souls-like games made by other developer teams, most of which are indie, and whether he's played any of them himself and what he thinks about the evolution of the genre across gaming as a whole. soul, to which he responded by humbly saying he is not to be credited for creating the Souls-like genre, which I personally think we all think is BS, but you know, whatever. He then says he loves all the different Souls-like games on the market and enjoys playing them quite a bit, which even goes as far as to help him learn new things as a creator. He then states that during the development of Demon's Souls, he apparently just looked around at the gaming market at the time and created what seemed to be the current trends in an effort to just meet gamers' current expectations. It's pretty amusing to me that in an apparent attempt to just create a trendy game, he actually ended up creating one of the most unique and new experiences known to gaming. But anyway, the final question asked in this interview was a very open-ended, what would you say to players who are looking forward to Shadow of the Erdtree? Which would be us, of course. Miyazaki then wrapped the interview by addressing his Chinese fans and saying that when developing games, he and the team don't try to adhere to a certain cultural circle, but rather simply to all players who enjoy their games. He's very happy that it's popular in China, and invites all players of Elden Ring to experience the DLC for ourselves, enjoying the combat and the fun of exploration. And that wraps up the latest Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC interview between Zihu and Miyazaki. My personal biggest takeaways from this newest interview are that the DLC will likely be a longer experience than Miyazaki is implying, and that we will have actual lore answers revealed to us, not limited to but including an answer on what specifically the relationship is between Miquella and his alter ego Saint Trina, and that Miyazaki is a super humble guy and would probably be a great dude to just catch a drink with. What was your biggest takeaway though? And are you excited for the DLC? Let me know everything in the comments below. And be sure to drop a like on this video so it gets spread around to other Elden Ring fans just like you and me. And subscribe if you haven't already for more news breakdowns and lore deep dives. It takes just a second, you have everything to gain if you're a fan of these games, and you can always unsubscribe later if I lose my touch. Huge thanks as always to my Bandit crew, and that's all I've got for this one. Follow me on my socials for updates and giveaways or just to say hi to little old me, and I'll see you next time. This is Bandit, signing out. Peace!